My father-in-law installed cameras in our bedroom for safety. When I confronted him, he just smiled, as if it was no big deal. I just need to make sure my son is happy, he said casually. My husband, James, shrugged. It's not a big deal. That night, I packed my bags. The next morning, when they woke up, they found the house completely empty. James and I had been married for a year. We were still saving up for a place of our own when his dad, Richard, offered to let us live in his house. You'll save money, he insisted. No need to rush into a mortgage. I wasn't thrilled about it. Richard had always been a little too involved in James' life. He would show up unannounced when we were dating, call multiple times a day, and constantly comment on how James used to be so happy before he met me. James always brushed it off. That's just how he is, he would say. I let it go. We moved in, and from day one, Richard made sure I knew whose house it really was. It started with small things. He'd walk into our bedroom without knocking, acting like it was no big deal. One time, he even walked in on me changing, acting all flustered, as if he didn't know I was in there. He made strange comments. A strong marriage needs consistency, he would say. A man should never go to bed frustrated. Women these days don't know how to take care of their husbands. I tried to tell James it was making me uncomfortable, but he just rolled his eyes. He's just old-fashioned, he said. Let it go. Then came the rules. No locked doors. I should always be available, and I had to tell him where I was at all times. Dinner was at 6, no exceptions. If I broke any of these rules, there would be guilt trips. This is my house. I just asked for one thing. Richard would say it was suffocating, but James acted like I was the crazy one for feeling that way. I should have left then, but I didn't. I stayed, thinking things might improve. Then one night, everything changed. I came home early from work. James and Richard were out, so I had the house to myself. I went to our bedroom to change, and as I took off my sweater, something caught my eye, a small blinking red light on the smoke detector above our bed. I froze. My brain tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a faulty alarm. Maybe the battery was dying, but something fell off. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and unscrewed the cover. Inside, there was a camera. I nearly dropped it. My hands shook, and my stomach twisted into knots. I searched the room frantically, tearing apart every corner. I found 2 more. One was tucked behind the TV, and another was hidden inside the bathroom vent. That's when the truth hit me. Someone had been watching us. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't wait for them to come home. As soon as Richard and James walked through the door, I was in the kitchen, holding the camera in my hand. I slammed it onto the table. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice shaking. Richard barely glanced at it, then smiled, almost smugly. I just need to make sure my son is happy. I felt my body go cold. My vision blurred, and my heart pounded in my chest. What did you just say? I asked again, my voice trembling. Richard sighed, like I was overreacting. I had to be sure you weren't making him miserable. Miserable? You mean to tell me you've been spying on us in our bedroom? I was shaking now, barely able to control the rage building inside me. Richard didn't flinch. I wouldn't call it spying, he said dismissively. And then I turned to James. I needed him to be just as horrified as I was. I needed him to take charge, to tell his father to get out of our lives and never do something like this again. But instead, he looked away. That was all I needed to see. I turned back to Richard, but I couldn't even look at James anymore. You knew about this, I whispered, barely able to speak. James didn't answer. He just shrugged. It's his house, he said quietly, if it makes him comfortable. Comfortable? My entire body trembled with disbelief. James, your father's been watching us. In our bedroom. I could barely get the words out. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You're overreacting. That's when something inside me snapped. I had spent months trying to be the perfect wife, trying to ignore Richard's controlling behavior, trying to justify James' indifference. And for what? To be treated like this? I was done. I didn't say another word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply nodded, turned, and walked away. I packed my things. The night I packed my bags, it wasn't just about leaving. I didn't pack for myself. I took everything. Everything that belonged to me. My clothes, my books, my jewelry, my electronics. Every little thing I had worked hard to earn, bought, or legally owned. Even things I thought I'd never part with. I gathered them up one by one, into suitcases, bags, and boxes. This was more than just a breakup. This was something bigger. I called my best friend, and without hesitation, I told her I needed a place to stay. She didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to talk, not yet, not until I was gone. Then I made a few more calls, quiet, deliberate calls, setting things in motion. I didn't want to make a scene, but I also didn't want to leave anything to chance. The next morning, when the sun rose, they woke up to a house completely empty. No traces of me. No signs of where I had gone. Nothing was left behind. I could only imagine confusion, the questions swirling around their heads as they realized I was gone, taking everything with me. But I wasn't done yet. No, this wasn't just about leaving. It was about making them feel the same emptiness, the same sense of loss that they had made me feel for years. I stood outside the house one last time, staring at the home that had once been mine. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. James and Richard were still asleep inside, clueless, unaware that their world was about to implode. I watched the house for a moment, trying to steady my breath, before I climbed into my friend's car. I didn't look back. I knew the moment I left, there would be no going back. But I wasn't done. This wasn't over. When James woke up, the house was a shell of what it once was. No furniture, no clothes, no electronics. Even the bed was gone. The silence must have been deafening. As soon as he realized what had happened, he started calling me. At first, the calls were frantic, angry, accusing. Where the hell are you? Why are all your things gone? Come back and stop being crazy, he demanded. But I didn't respond. The next round of calls were more insistent. James was trying to guilt-trip me now. You're overreacting, he said. It wasn't a big deal. We could have talked about this. We should have talked about this. I didn't respond to that either. Then came Richard's turn. He tried calling too. I didn't pick up his calls either, and that's when things took a real turn. James thought he still had access to our savings. He didn't. The money was in my name. Every paycheck, every deposit, every transfer. It all went into an account that only I had access to. James called again. 56 times, to be exact. By noon, my inbox was flooded with messages. James, what the F asterisk 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 did you do? Where's our money? James, you can't just take everything. I didn't respond. Not to him, not to Richard. I was done talking. But I wasn't done yet. I was still 3 steps ahead of them. I went straight to the police. I didn't hesitate. I showed them everything. Everything I had, the footage from the security cameras, the receipts of the things I bought, and the things they had no idea I owned. The detective took it seriously, and soon a detective was assigned to the case. A warrant was issued. The police were on it. But James and Richard didn't panic like I expected them to. Instead, they fought back. 2 days later, I got legal papers served to me. James was suing me, trying to get back what he believed was his share of the savings. He wanted the house, the car, everything. Richard backed him up, claiming that I was emotionally unstable and had stolen from James. For a moment, I considered leaving. I thought it was over. They were trying to take me down, and maybe they'd succeed. But they had no idea what was coming next. While they were scrambling to find ways to hurt me, I was already several steps ahead. Faster than I expected, the police raided the house. Richard was arrested for illegal surveillance and invasion of privacy. James, well, he just stood there, watching as his father was dragged away. He didn't say a word. He didn't fight it. Then he turned to me. He started begging. He showed up at my friend's house, crying. Please, we can fix this, he said. It's all a misunderstanding. I stared at him, unwavering. You knew. His voice cracked. It's not like that. You're making it worse than it is. I stepped closer, narrowing my eyes. Your father has been watching us. He put cameras in our bedroom, and you just let it happen." He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought he was just looking out for me. Looking out for him? I felt sick to my stomach. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, defeated. He was dead to me. But then he played his final card. I didn't see it coming. I received a call from the detective handling Richard's case. The line went cold as the detective's voice filled the air. "Something's not right," he said, and my stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "We got some of the footage from the cameras," he explained. "Enough to prove illegal surveillance, but the files that were erased, those weren't just random." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. The detective's tone became more serious. "They were only from one camera, the one in the bedroom, and it wasn't Richard who erased them." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" The detective paused before delivering the crushing news. "Based on the timestamps, the footage was wiped at 4:12 a.m. the night before you left." I felt the room spin. "James wasn't asleep," the detective continued. "Richard was. It was James who wiped them." I could already feel the dread creeping up my spine. What if those cameras weren't just for spying? What if they had been for something much worse? And that's when the terrifying thought hit me. What if James wasn't done? I should have known. Should have seen this coming. After Richard's arrest, I thought I was finally free. I thought the nightmare was over. The police had the evidence they needed, I was safe, and I was ready to move on. But then the detective called me, and everything turned upside down. Detective Harper was thorough. He had been on the case from the start. So when he said, "Something doesn't add up," I knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "We recovered partial footage," he explained. "Enough to prove illegal surveillance, but the files that were erased, those weren't random. They were only from the bedroom camera." I gripped my phone, feeling the blood drain from my face. "It wasn't Richard who erased them," the detective said, his voice hard. "It was James." My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream. The worst part? The files weren't just deleted. They were wiped. Completely gone. Only the footage from the bedroom. And that's when I realized something. James wasn't done yet. At first, I had believed James was nothing more than a coward, a liar, a manipulative, weak-willed little boy who was too scared to stand up to his father, Richard. He was a man who hid behind his father's shadow, always playing the victim. But over time, I began to question whether James was something far worse than I had imagined. The only reason to delete that footage from the security system was if there was something on it, something that could be used against him or something that could be used against me. For the next 3 days, I hardly slept. I replayed every memory, every single moment that had happened in that house. What had James been doing when I was asleep? What had I done that he didn't want the police to see? The worst part was that I couldn't remember. All I knew was that something was off. Something wasn't right. And the more I thought about it, the more my suspicion grew. James wasn't panicking because of Richard's arrest. No, he was panicking because he knew what was coming next. The tech team managed to recover one file. Just one. It was a single 1-minute clip. I met with Detective Harper at the station. He set up a laptop, and as he hit play, I felt my chest tighten. The screen flickered to life, showing our bedroom in night vision mode. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. I was asleep, unaware of anything happening around me. But James, he was awake. He was standing over me, just standing there, watching me. His figure loomed in the dim light. And for several minutes, he didn't move a muscle. He didn't touch me, didn't say a word. He just stared. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped out of frame. A few seconds later, the screen cut to black. That was it. That was the last file before everything was erased from the system. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. My skin felt like it was crawling, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at Detective Harper, my voice barely above a whisper. What the hell was he doing? Harper exhaled slowly, his face grim. "That's what we need to find out." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of what I had just seen. I knew I had to act fast. I went straight to my lawyer the next day and filed a restraining order against James. He didn't take it well, of course. At first, he bombarded me with calls. Tried to convince me it was all a misunderstanding. "We need to talk," he pleaded. "It's not what you think. I didn't do anything wrong." But I was done. I blocked him immediately. Then things escalated. James started showing up at my friends' houses, at my work, just waiting in his car outside, watching me. It felt like I couldn't escape him. And then one day he was just gone. His bank accounts were drained, his job was quit, and his car was left at his dad's house. James vanished without a trace. A week later, I received another call from Detective Harper. "We found something," he said, his tone heavier than usual. I frowned, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "Richard's finances," he explained. Turns out he had multiple offshore accounts. There was a pause before he continued. "The weird part, 2 of those accounts were in James' name." My blood ran cold. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What are you saying?" I whispered. Harper let out a long breath. "I don't think Richard was the mastermind here. I think it was James." Suddenly, everything fell into place. Richard had been controlling, yes, but he was also sloppy, reckless in his power. James, on the other hand, was quiet, careful, a planner. What if the cameras were never about Richard watching me? What if they were about James watching me? What if the whole time I had been the target? What if I was never supposed to find the cameras? What if James had wanted to catch me doing something that could be used to his advantage? What if he already had it? I couldn't breathe. My mind spun with questions. And as the wave of it all hit me, I realized that this was far from over. James wasn't hiding because he was scared. He was hiding because he was waiting for the right moment to strike. James was not the man I thought he was. For so long, I had blamed Richard. He was the creepy, controlling father-in-law with no boundaries. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Richard was just a distraction, a puppet in James' game. The real danger was James. And now he was gone, hiding, watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. 2 weeks passed, and I finally settled into my new apartment. It was small, quiet, and safe, or at least I tried to convince myself that it was. I hadn't heard from James since he disappeared. I thought maybe, just maybe, he had given up. I was wrong. It happened late at night, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep. My phone buzzed, and I jolted awake. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something deep inside me told me I needed to. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. "Hello," I said, my voice tight with fear. There was silence on the other end, then a deep breath, a voice I hadn't heard in weeks, but one I would never forget. It was never about my dad. James said. My heart stopped. I sat up, my fingers gripping the phone so tight that they ached. "Where are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. But James didn't answer. Instead, there was another long pause before he spoke again. "You were supposed to stay." I could feel the blood drain from my face. The panic crept up my spine, and I knew then that I wasn't safe. James wasn't just a shadow from my past. He was a ticking time bomb, and I was the target. And this was far from over. I was supposed to fail. I could feel my stomach drop, like a heavy stone had settled in my gut, weighing me down. But fail at what? The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, like it would swallow me whole. I searched his face, trying to make sense of the cold expression, but there was nothing there, no trace of emotion, nothing but a flat, chilling stillness. Then, in a voice as devoid of warmth as the room around us, James spoke. I needed proof. My hand shook involuntarily. The tremor not just from fear, but from the sudden realization that the game had never been what I thought it was. Proof of what? I managed to ask, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. James let out a long, drawn-out sigh. It wasn't the kind of sigh you make when you're tired. It was the kind of sigh you give someone who's too slow to understand something simple. "Proof that you weren't loyal," he said flatly, his words like a slap across my face. I couldn't speak. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to process his words, to make sense of what he was saying. The tension in the air grew thicker, wrapping around me like a noose. James' eyes never wavered from mine as he continued. His voice was eerily calm, like he was explaining something completely normal. You were never supposed to find the cameras. He said it like it was a minor inconvenience, a small detail that had gone wrong. I was supposed to catch you cheating. My entire body went cold, frozen by the implications of his words. I felt the blood drain from my face as the truth slowly settled into me. The cameras. All the times I'd felt watched, observed in ways that never quite made sense. The strange feeling of being followed, of being scrutinized when I thought I was alone. James kept talking, his voice still mechanical, detached. My dad's a perfect scapegoat, right? The creepy old man, the guy who can't mind his business. You blamed him immediately. It was perfect. He laughed, but there was no joy in it. That's why it worked. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what had been happening. You set me up, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The horror of it all was overwhelming. He had been manipulating me, using me as a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Every argument, every time James had dismissed my concerns about Richard, had been part of the act. He'd been letting me believe it was all Richard, while setting me up for something much darker. What if I hadn't found the cameras? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, trembling with fear and confusion. What if I had never uncovered his lies? What would have happened to me then? There was a pause. Then a chilling chuckle escaped his lips. Then I would have had what I needed. My stomach churned as the full gravity of his plan hit me. The cameras weren't just about surveillance. They were bait. James had been trying to lure me into a trap. He wanted footage of me with another man, proof, leverage. But the worst part was that I hadn't cheated. I hadn't done anything wrong. Yet here I was, trapped in this web of lies and deceit. Why erase the footage? Why delete it? I asked, my voice trembling now. The confusion was gnawing at me. If he'd set this entire thing up, why remove the evidence? James sighed again, this time with a slight edge of frustration, like he was explaining something to a child. You didn't, he said, his voice flat, but something shifted in his tone. You didn't do anything wrong. That's the problem. I stared at him, not understanding, as his voice dropped lower, tinged with something darker. You were too good. You were too perfect. He seemed to savor the words. That's why I had to push you. I had to make you doubt yourself. I had to make you miserable. The weight of his words crushed me. My chest tightened, and I could barely breathe as the full realization hit. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to feel so unloved, so unimportant, so unnoticed, that I would seek comfort elsewhere, so that he could catch me. He wanted me to turn to another man, and if I had, he would have had the perfect proof. He would have used me, used my own weaknesses to destroy me. But I hadn't cheated. I hadn't given him what he wanted. And that, I realize now, was a problem for him. Suddenly, the room felt even colder. I clutched my stomach, sickened by the depth of his manipulation. The money, the lies, the surveillance. It had all been a carefully orchestrated plan. But now, something inside me snapped. The pieces were all falling into place. This was over. I stood up, my legs weak but determined. The weight of what I knew, of what had happened, pushed me forward. I'm calling Detective Harper, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to find him. Now! Harper had been tracking James' movements for weeks, but now we had a breakthrough. James had drained his personal accounts, but there was one account still active, hidden away, tied to his father's assets. The police had been tracking him for days, and they knew exactly where he was. James had checked into a hotel downtown. I told Harper I wanted to be there when they confronted him. He hesitated, but in the end, agreed on the condition that I stay behind the officers. I agreed, but deep down I knew I wouldn't stay quiet. I couldn't. When we arrived at the hotel, I saw him sitting in the lounge, casually sipping a drink like he had nothing to fear. When he saw me, he smiled, as if he were the one in control. There you are, he said with a smirk. Took you long enough. The officer stepped forward, and the room went still. James Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, illegal surveillance, and several other charges. One of them announced. James didn't fight. He didn't struggle. Instead, he looked straight at me, a cold, emotionless gaze locking onto mine. You think you won? He asked, his voice calm, almost amused. You'll never be free of me. The officers dragged him away, but his words lingered, a cruel echo in my mind. James had underestimated me. He thought he could control me, break me, use me, but I had broken free. His offshore accounts were frozen. The lawsuit against me was dropped. The police were still recovering files from the deleted footage, but the evidence against him was already damning. He wouldn't be getting away this time. As for Richard, he tried to fight the charges, but with all the evidence stacking up against him, he had no choice but to take a plea deal. They were both gone from my life, their twisted games behind me. But James' final words stayed with me. I wish I could say I never thought about him again, that I had left it all behind. But there were nights, in the quiet moments, when I'd wake up with that sense of unease creeping up on me, that feeling of being watched. Even though I knew the cameras were gone, even though I knew he was behind bars, that lingering fear didn't disappear. It was like a shadow that never quite left. And so, every night I would check. I would check the windows, the doors, just to make sure. I knew that men like James didn't just stop. They waited, they plotted, and when you least expected it, they would come back. But next time, I'd be ready.